Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Shane Plays Tomb of Annihilation Notes, where I give my notes and thoughts and tips and sort of running commentary on running the D&D 5e adventure Tomb of Annihilation. If you're a new viewer, just want to let you know this is not an actual play. This is it's just my thoughts and recap. And I give tips on running the adventure, but also just sort of try to give tips on DMing and rules clarifications and that sort of thing. So if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much. And well, let's get going on the most recent recap. So this is normally the point where I do viewer feedback and rules clarifications and that sort of thing. So I'm going to put on my +3 spectacles of rules clarification and viewer feedback. Now this episode, I think this is the first. I've been doing these videos for years, whether it's Tomb of Annihilation or Out of the Abyss or whatever. I think this is the first time we've never had any viewer feedback. So won't be any viewer feedback today, but there will be some rules clarification, and we have a new Patreon that I want to give a shout out to. Before I do that, I just want to say that, I always, if I don't get comments on a video, that's fine. But one of the reasons I keep doing these, I always get comments like, hey, these are really helpful. So I like your comments, and I don't mind answering your questions and things like that. So always feel free. If you're like, well, should I comment or not? Feel free to comment. That's fine. Okay, so let's get to our newest Patreon supporter, and it's Justin. Thank you so much, Justin. Justin came in at the $10 level. And what I've said with these videos, I did these videos for a long time with no Patreon or anything like that, and, minimized ads and all that. Well, people keep saying they want them, and they're actually kind of hard for me to find the time to do them, even though I enjoy doing them. So I kind of said, okay, if we want these, the more Patreon support I get, the more I can, justify to my family spending time doing them. So said if I got to at least $25 a month, then it would be one video per month, guaranteed, maybe more, but at least one a month. And then as we go up, there's increasing tiers. So I'll put the Patreon link in the show notes. And at the $10 level, not only does Justin get an in-video shout out, thank you, Justin. Sorry about that. I'm going to leave that in. But at the $10 level, Justin also gets, he'll get listed in the credits as a supporter, and then also at the $10 level and above, you get a personal haiku written. So this is the second time we've done a haiku on the show, and this one I actually know Justin, so this haiku is a little bit of a long-running joke between me and Justin. When I did my podcast as a radio show as well, one of the running gags was this dog Muffin who was out to sabotage the show, and it was a lot of fun. So I wrote a Muffin related haiku for Justin. So here you go. Oh, Muffin, Muffin, your plots are sublimely fierce. Your growl like thunder. There you go. I hope you enjoy your haiku, Justin. And again, thank you for the support. And anybody out there, if you can't support, hey, totally understand. If you can, I'm not going to say no. I do appreciate it. Like I said, I'm not trying to get rich off of these or anything like that. I'm just trying to bring a little bit of income in to justify, setting aside the time. 'Cause out of all the stuff I do for all my Shane Plays, these, for whatever reason, by the time I prepare, record, edit, and all that, these take the longest. So, but I love that people get benefit out of them. So, all right, moving on. I said we didn't have any viewer feedback, which is true, but we do have some rules clarifications. And what I'll do is each video is a recap of the previous several sessions. I think this video is gonna cover 3 sessions. And what I'll do is I'll kind of pick, if I wrote a note down like, hey, I need to research this rule, or if a rules discussion came up during a session, I'll make a note to go over it during these videos, because perhaps it can help other DMs and players. So here we go. All right, so the rules discussion, one of my players is a wizard and uses the Portent dice, which is from the divination school of a wizard. So, and the note I had written is, portent dice versus someone rolling with advantage. So what's the difference? And I imagine you know by now, but if you don't, rolling with advantage means, normally you roll a d20 on some kind of check. When you roll with advantage, you roll 2 d20 dice. So 2 dice, both of them being d20s, and you take the highest result. So with advantage, you have an advantage. You have a better chance of getting the higher number that you want to help you succeed. Disadvantage is the opposite, where you roll 2 and you take the lower result. So if you're at disadvantage, you have a better chance of failing. So there we go. All right. Now portent dice, and these are in the Player's Handbook on page 116. So let's take a look at these real quick. And this is under the divination scale, divination school for wizards, page 116. It says, starting at 2nd level, when you choose this school, glimpses of the future begin to press in on your awareness. When you finish a long rest, you roll 2 d20s, and you record right then. You write down or somehow track the numbers you rolled. You can replace any attack roll, saving throw, or ability check made by you or a creature that you can see, so that can be an ally, an enemy, or whatever, with one of these foretelling rolls. You must choose to do so before the roll. So before the roll happens, you can say, I'm going to use one of my portent dice. You must choose to do so before the roll, and you can replace a roll in this way only once per turn. Not once per round, once per turn. Each foretelling roll can be used only once. When you finish a long rest, you lose any unused foretelling rolls. So that's saying if you're a wizard and you're 2nd level or higher and you use the divination school, then after every long rest, you roll 2 d20s. You write down those numbers, and then until you finish your next long rest, you can use those to replace other dice rolls. You can only, so if you have like a 12 and a 7, when you use that 12, it's gone. You mark it out. When you use that 7, it's gone. Mark it out. And whether it's an ally, any creature you can see, NPC, whatever, when they're about to roll, you can say, this is what they rolled instead. And if you want them to fail, you would say, I'm going to give them a 7. Say you rolled a 20 as part of one of your portent rolls before somebody does something and you want them to succeed, you can, I'm going to give them a 20. And then it's like they rolled a critical success, like if they're in combat or whatever. So that's the difference between portent dice and advantage. It's actually kind of a cool mechanic, because if you're a DM or a player, it's kind of hard. How do you narratively do I see the future? Especially if you're a player. You don't know what the future is going to bring, and a lot of times the DM doesn't either. So it's a nice mechanical way to handle it. It's a little glimpse of the future to allow the wizard to have enough of a glimpse of the future to somehow impact what's happening. So, all right. Also, this came up. Does the paralyzed condition end concentration? So if I've got a spell going, requires concentration, I get paralyzed. Does that end the concentration? So let's go take a look. So let's look. There's a couple reasons why I want to go over them. One, I could see why it would be confusing, and then 2, this is a great way to show in general ways to make rulings in D&D. So let's go to 203. Oh no, page 291, Appendix A is conditions in the Player's Handbook. So let's take a look at this. There we go. And paralyzed on page 291 says, a paralyzed creature is incapacitated. See the condition and can't move or speak. What is that? Is that in concentration? It would sound like it, but we'll have to check. Also, the creature automatically fails strength and dexterity saving throws. Well, that doesn't end concentration. Attack rolls against the creature have advantage. That doesn't end concentration. And any attack that hits the creature is a critical hit if the attacker is within 5 feet of the creature. Well, that could potentially end concentration, but it's not an up or down. Your concentration's over because you're paralyzed. So what you got to do, let's go over to incapacitated. And then you look at incapacitated on page 290, and it says an incapacitated creature can't take actions or reactions. Well, he can't move or speak. That doesn't necessarily end concentration. That's back over on paralyzed. And the incapacitated creature can't take actions or reactions. Well, that doesn't necessarily end concentration. However, if you go look at the concentration description on page 203, so let's go to page 203 here and look at concentration. Then said some spells maintain, this is on page 203, some spells require you to maintain concentration in order to keep them active. If you lose concentration, such a spell ends. Okay. And it specifically says, under the entry, under the list of things that will end concentration, it says being incapacitated or killed, you lose concentration of a spell if you're incapacitated or if you die. So, paralyzed, among the other things it does, also incapacitates the target, and being incapacitated ends concentration. So there you go. And I went through that exercise to show you that sometimes you got to dig a little, because if you just looked at the condition descriptions, you could say, well, no, I mean, even though it incapacitated sounds like you can't concentrate, it doesn't necessarily say here in the condition. But if you go look at concentration, it outright states it. So a lot of D&D rulings work that way. You have to know something that's not directly listed in the where you think it would be. You think it would be listed under the condition. And always, you could as a DM, you can decide. Well, you have leeway. One of the things with D&D and other RPGs, the rules are great. The rules give you a framework, but you're not bound to them. You can, so a DM can make a different decision. That's another point that's worth making. It comes up all the time, and a lot of people are like, well, that's kind of a newer interpretation of RPGs and D&D, and it's really not. I mean, it's all the way back. I recently talked with John Peterson. There's a Shane Plays Geek Talk podcast out there about this. John Peterson, this elusive shift book, and he talks about the origins of role-playing. Where did role-playing come from? The term, everything. And I mean, it's all the way back to the beginning. It's like, and a few games here and there are like, these are the rules, you can't break them. But D&D and other RPGs almost universally from the beginning have been like, hey, you don't like a rule, change it. So anyway, all right, moving on. Let's see what else we got here. Does disengage also let you move? So, in other words, if you disengage as an action and then move, do you get the disengage? Like, do you move during the disengage action, and then can you take another move action, after that or whatever? And I know it came up in one of our sessions. I remember talking about it. I don't remember what we said at the time, but I went and looked it up, and it's pretty straightforward. If you go to page 192 in the PHB, the old player handbook, let's go to 192. 192. Actions in combat. One of them is disengage. Disengage says if you take the disengage action, your movement doesn't provoke opportunity attacks for the rest of the turn. So this doesn't apply to movement before, it's only movement after you take the disengage action. But what it says is, the key here is, if you take the disengage action, an action is a non-movement thing, like usually in a round, you get, on your turn or your round or whatever, you get a certain amount of movement, and then you get an action. Now, there may be bonus actions or something like that. We're not worried about that. We're just talking about the basic rules. And if you take an action, That's not a movement thing, unless there's just some weird description in that action that adds to it. But as it is here, you take the disengage action as an action. You don't get movement with it. And then any movement you use after that action, you do not provoke attacks of opportunity. So there you go. You do not get extra. The disengage action itself does not come with movement built in, I guess is the best way to put it. So I think that's it for the rules clarification. Let me double check. Let's see. Yes, it is. So I'm going to take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback and rules clarification, and we will get going with recapping what happened in these sessions. All right, so last video we covered Firefinger, which Azaka, their guide, had asked for their help. Basically said, I will guide you for free if you help me take care of some personal business at Firefinger. So she guided them for a while, and then they were like, okay, let's go help you out. And so then they went to Firefinger and took care of the Terra folk, P-T-E-R-A folk, flying pteranodon people, that had taken over Firefinger, which was this big, tall, natural kind of spire thing in the middle of the jungle with a flame on top. That's why it's called Firefinger. So they finally defeated the Terra folk. They lost their NPC arena. What do you call that? Gladiator. He plummeted off the top and died to a long fall. So they lost that gladiator who had been a great help up to now. And then they said, okay, we're going to do a long rest, and Azaka said, hey, you've honored your request. I've spent enough time with you to know that you are, honorable people, and I'm going to guide you somewhere I think that can help you in your quest. And so she's going to take them to Orolunga. That's how I got the party to Orolunga, which is a pretty important. It's not absolutely vital, because there's ways that you can even get to Orolunga, and we'll talk about that here in a second, and not even get the information or the help that it can give you. But it's a really interesting part of the adventure, and it's an interesting place in Chult. And it really feels to me like it's almost a stop. It's a must stop. Almost like stopping and visiting Lady Galadriel in Lord of the Rings. It almost has that kind of feel to it. So, but if you don't go to Orolunga, your players can still finish the adventure. So, they'll be like, oh, they're not even going anywhere near Orolunga. How do I get them there? So they finished their long rest. Now, two of the players, one was I think a human rogue, and the other one was a lizard folk, decided to eat the Terra folk meat. And there was some discussion in the group, out of character and in character, about how the other people reacted to that, because the Terra folk, even though they're enemies, they were sentient humanoids. Now, for the lizard folk, if you research lizard folk, they often don't understand the customs and norms of other humanoids. So it's like, it is an enemy. I have defeated it. I'm going to eat it. Didn't really. So it wasn't really an issue there. But for the other player, who's a half drow, at the time, I think their player died, their character died, and they made a new one. They were neutral good, and they worshipped the goddess of luck. So I didn't really push or anything, but there was some discussion, and they were getting some kind of, no one was offended by Throden, who is the druid lizard folk, but there were a lot of raised eyebrows and comments about the half drow eating on that. So that was some in character sort of reaction, and I didn't do anything at this moment, because I'm one of the DMs that I feel like that if you're in a fantasy world that has cosmological forces of good and evil. Now let me be clear, you don't have to play this way. If you don't like alignment, just eject it right out of your game. But I like alignment, and I talk about that with my players. if they join my group or if we start a campaign, I'm like, alignment's part of the campaign. So there's a chance to discuss or opt out or whatever at that moment. But this player, during this adventure, starts doing some stuff that is outside of their alignment, and I start having it affect their, I say you're not sleeping well, you feel like something's not quite right. And I was going to get it up to the point where maybe some of their abilities stopped working, or maybe they got a disadvantage with some of their abilities just because there's something not right, which means you either need to sort it out or you need to do an alignment change. But I'm not going to do like bam the first time that you do something that's outside of your alignment. It's an ongoing, very long process, and there will be clues, and I want it to be interesting narratively, not just like some bam, you're not following the rules. So, and there'll be more discussion of that as this adventure goes. And then what I did, because they've already done a lot of travel, you get to a point in Chult, because Chult is in a lot of cases it's a wilderness adventure. Then at the end it turns into a very deadly dungeon crawl. But a massive amount of Tomb of Annihilation is what used to be called a hex crawl, where you're just going hex to hex to hex to hex, and measuring how long it takes you, and having random encounters and difficulties and stuff like that. So once you establish that that's what Chult is like, and I think I've said this in other videos, you don't have to just keep slogging it. That'll get boring. Now, if your players love it, if they love, I want to go through every hex and I want to roll for random encounters and all that, then do it. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. But for me, we've spent plenty of time establishing how dangerous Chult is, or what it's like to travel in Chult. So what I've started doing is, if they're recovering ground they've already covered, or if it's not a particularly dangerous area, I'm going to start montaging it. Because this is a pretty long campaign. We've been in this campaign for, I think, like a year and a half now or something like that, maybe even longer. I'm recapping sessions that happened months back. To me, there's no point to keep making that point unless the players just love it, and then okay, give it to them. So I've just started, we'll montage it unless it's dangerous or there's some other reason to not montage it, especially if it's area they've already covered. So did random encounters as especially if they have a guide, right? Traveling in Chult without a guide is probably a lot more dangerous. You can get lost and stuff like that. And don't forget, there are rolls to see if you get lost. I think I've done that once or twice, but for the most part, I don't do that. I just, what kind of terrain are they on? What kind, what's the weather? Don't forget to throw in tropical storms every now and then, because there's a lot of that happens. You delay travel, say you're hunkered down for a day because of a tropical storm. Don't forget to throw that kind of stuff in for atmosphere. But at the same time, there's so much travel. And I've talked about this before, I'll probably talk about this a lot more in the videos to come, because as I've ran this and continue to run it, it's a ticking clock adventure. We got to hurry up and solve this before not only the lady that hired us, but all these other people die from death curse. But it takes a long time to travel around Chult. So those two competing things are... And I figured out how I'm going to do it with the lady that hired them. And I'll reveal that in a future video. But if I compare, because every now and then the players will say, well, how much time has passed? And what about our patron, the lady that hired us? And I'll be like, we'll deal with that, when we get there. But I've got a way to deal with that so that they can get an adventure and explore, because you give them this big continent, all this cool stuff to explore, and then you're like, oh, no, hurry up, you can't go to all these places because you got to go save. I guess you could use the book as a source book to come back and adventure in later. But anyway, most of the locations are written from the perspective of you're trying to figure out the death curse. So it's not just a source book. All right, anyway. Got a couple of random encounters, and this one was kind of neat. they found some rare plants. So instead of it just being something trying to kill them, they found some beneficial roots, Ryath roots, I think they're called. They're in the book. So it's not. It's sometimes they can find a cache of treasure. Sometimes they can find roots. Roots. I don't know why I said it like that. Roots. Sometimes they'll get into a fight, whatever. So the random encounters aren't just fights, but they did run into Yuan-ti purebloods, and they avoided those. They just decided not to fight. And then they ran into 7 ghouls and a ghast. And the ghast, they'll start the undead in Chult. There's a lot of them, but there's also a reason for them in some cases. And I think this ghast had a symbol on its forehead. I think that's mentioned in the random encounter, so I made sure to mention that to the players because that'll become important later. I think they're Rosnissi's mark or something like that. It took them 14 days travel to get from, this is one session they did 14 days travel. I don't know if they had travel on top of that, but they did 4x hex crawl. They had random encounter rules. We montaged 10. Let's see, 10. We montaged 10 days, and we did 4 days by the hex crawl rules. I guess because they were in dangerous areas. And then another thing I wanted to mention was I had them when we were montaging, and I got this idea from another game. I can't remember which one it was. I was listening to a podcast, and they talked about how they did travel in some circumstances where they would have all the players sort of pitch in and describe something that happens. Not something that impacts the adventure, but that's just flavor. Like describe something that happens. And I had each player do that. Like we ran into a beautiful stream, or we saw beautiful birds of paradise flying over, or, it could be anything. As long as it doesn't, we found a rope bridge and crossed it. I mean, as long as or we had a day with beautiful clouds. I mean, just anything that gives that, like when you montage in a movie and you see those scenes. We saw 1,000 birds fly off the top of the trees when we walked by. But yeah, I had them to add flavor scenes for each day's travel. So when we montaged it, for each day, I was like, hey, tell us something cool that happened that day. Tell us. So that way it wasn't just, okay, we hand waved it. It not only made it more interesting, but it gave the players a chance to engage and give some input. I wish I could remember what game that was so I could give it credit, but it's been a while. They had some more random encounters on the way to Orolunga, including cannibal tribal warriors that had blue triangles on their foreheads. And I believe also like that ghast. So, and I've got a note here that refers to Rosnissi. So, they're seeing more and more of that. The adventures, even in random encounters, is sort of seeding that, because Rosnissi is going to have to be dealt with. He is a Yuan-ti, and he is not nice. So he has history in Chult. So it's one thing that's interesting here. I'm looking at these notes is that except for one random encounter, 1, 2, 3, they avoided and snuck away from random encounters. Like it's almost like they get the urgency, like we got to keep going. So they kept avoiding them. And then we ended a session with them coming to Orolunga, and I read the descriptive text box of Orolunga, and then I said, I'll see you next week. It's a dun, and then the credits roll for that week's episode. So Orolunga, put my glasses back on here. I guess they are also spectacles of reading descriptive text. Orolunga. Orolunga this is an interesting location that you really want to, if you're going to go here, spend some time getting ready for it. because it's a little, one, it's kind of a cool location, but two, magically it's a little bit different from most other locations players will run into either in this adventure or other ones. So I'm going to read a little section here from page 81 under the Orolunga entry that I think it's wise to be cognizant of if players ask questions or try to do stuff or maybe even get frustrated. It might help to think of the whole situation as a fairy tale. And before that, there's some tests on getting up Orolunga. It's a big ziggurat, which is that kind of pyramid that has the steps, and it's, you know, kind of almost like a like bit mapped or something, blocky pyramid. But it says bypassing the test by any means is flat out impossible. And it goes on to say, it might help to think of the whole situation as a fairy tale. It doesn't need to make sense because the magic of Orolunga is on a mythic scale that empowers the ability of any mortal. The entire ziggurat, if you cast detect magic on it, like, it will reveal that the entire ziggurat is encased in magic. And I think my players did that, and I was like, man, it's like, whoa, it's blinding, right? Because detect magic, depending on the strength of the magic, it'll glow brighter or less or whatever. So it's like blindingly magical. So what it is, and there's several steps. There's like three main levels, if you will, to the pyramid that you have to climb up, and each one has a test that you have to get by, and there's no way to get by it without solving the test. Now, the adventure has built-in hints to help the players do it, but just keep in mind, if they're going to try to get around, well, I'm going to fly up there, or I'm going to build a ladder, or I'm going to teleport, or I'm going to misty step, or any of that, that will all be foiled. It won't work. And if they start getting frustrated, you know, again, just like reinforce the magic level here is like staggering. And they'll get the point that the magic outclasses them. They cannot defeat this magic. So when you get to Orolunga, starting on page 80, you know, it says, all that remains of the ancient city of Orolunga is a crumbling ziggurat watched over by a guardian Naga. The Naga is thousands of years old and a font of useful information, perhaps the best source of information in Chult. However, she's not easy to reach. So now the official descriptive text when you arrive at Orolunga is a massive brick and stone ziggurat rises from the jungle. Two staircases angle up and across the front face, one from the right, the other from the left. So it's kind of, you know, there's two staircases kind of angling up the front of it to get to the top. To meet at a landing on the second level, 30 feet above your heads. So 30 feet up, these staircases meet, and the layout repeats on the second level. So on the second level, you have two staircases going up to the third level. And on the third level, you know, you have stuff going up to the top, but each success, that layout repeats on the second floor and the third level, but with each successive layer adding less height than the one below it. So, you know, each level is shorter. Like this level is very tall, and the second level is not as tall, and the third level is even shorter. The fourth level, 60 feet above the jungle floor, is an enclosed shrine or temple, its walls adorned with labyrinth symbols. The jungle encroaches right up to and onto this ancient structure. The first flights of steps are choked with creepers, tree roots, and flowering vines. It might have been surrounded by a city long ago, but the jungle is so dense that it would take hours of searching to find buried foundations and tumbled stones. And that's a pretty big hint. Don't even bother trying to dig. You know, you got to go up the thing. Again, it talks about the ziggurats encased in magic. This protective shell prevents anyone from ascending the ziggurat by any means other than climbing the stairs. The only way, I don't care what the players try, what spell they use or whatever, the only way to get to the top is by going up these stairs. And each level has a different test. And then it goes up and it gives you the first steps, second steps, third steps. And I'm not going to go into those in super detail, but each one is impossible to get by without doing a certain thing. And the first, when you try to get up, as you try to get up and fail on each level, a chwinga will appear and basically show how to get by. Okay? And on the first step, which you can get hurt. My players got hurt on the first step because they just tried to charge up and they got hurt to the back point because it's vines with thorns and stuff like that. But on the first steps, the first level, a chwinga shows up. And he's got, chwinga's the little jungle spirit thing during the appendix. And he's got a large orange and purple orchid, the flower. And it goes up, and the thorns part before it, and it goes through and the close behind it. So it's pretty obvious you need one of these orchids, so it's got rules in here about how to find the orchids. Okay? The second steps is you just can't, the more you try to walk up, the more it crumbles down. Walk up, crumbles down. No matter how much you try to walk up, it crumbles down. But the funny thing is, none of the pile of rubble never gets higher. But you just can't get up. And after a little bit, another chwinga will show up, and it's got an orange and purple orchid, and it's also carrying a red parrot feather. And then it just goes up with ease. And then, so it's also got rules in here, like the orchids and the feathers can be found in the jungle immediately surrounding the ziggurat. And then the third level is just covered in snakes, poisonous snakes, swarms of poisonous snakes. You kill some, more will pop up. There's no way you kill some, they'll pop up. No spells or it says no spells or abilities prevent the snakes from attacking someone. So there's no way to like cast some sort of magical thing and just go through the snakes. You can't. They will attack you through it. Again, this is very powerful magic. And then this is just the strangest one. After a few moments of examining the stairs, the characters notice a third chwinga standing among them at the base of the steps. And they each have, the first step chwinga has a mask that looks like a triceratops head. The second one has a mask that resembles a chameleon's head. And the third one has a mask that resembles a mongoose's face. Which I guess makes sense because mongooses and snakes are natural enemies. Ricky Tiki Tabby, right? Okay, so after a few moments of examining the stairs, the characters notice third chwinga. Its mask resembles a mongoose face, and it carries a red parrot feather and an orange and purple orchid. Now this gets weird. It's just, there's no way to put it. This gets weird. At the bottom step, the chwinga whacks the snake with its orchid to make it angry. Then strokes the snake's flank with a feather to calm it down, then lies down facing the snake, whereupon the reptile crawls to the mouth of the mask and inside the chwinga. The chwinga then slithers up the steps like a snake, untroubled by any of the other poisonous snakes. Yep. To climb the steps safely, characters must do the same thing, but this stage isn't automatic. The other ones are. As soon as you figure out the trick, you can go right up. Using the orchid and feathers are easy, but a character must make a successful DC 10 Constitution saving throw after swallowing a snake. Evil aligned characters have disadvantage on the saving throw. If they succeed, the character can slither up the steps safely. If the saving throw fails, the character takes 17, or in parentheses, 5 D6 psychic damage. You can try again, but the DC increases to 11. The DC increases by 1 more with each successive failure, so it just gets harder and harder. I think maybe like one of my players failed it and got it the next time. So, but yeah, that's pretty weird. All right, and then up the top, there's a shrine that's a simple rectangular structure of brick. The outside walls are decorated with labyrinth symbols of Opteo. You know, Opteo's the big top of the Chult pantheon of gods, deities. Beyond the open doorway is a barren, dusty room, but any character with a passive perception of 13 or higher can smell incense. Characters who enter without their orchid and feather find the shrine empty. This is very important. Now, you can waive this or whatever if you think it's so important that every character needs to be in. I think we had one character that didn't, and so they got left out. No, I think everybody made it in. Characters who enter without their orchid and feather find the shrine empty. Leaving and coming back with the items changes nothing. It's too late. The first time you walk into the shrine, you must have the orchid and feather, or game's over. Characters who enter with their orchid and feather find themselves in the same room, but as it was centuries ago. They can enter the Naga's presence once, and only once. Someone who leaves and comes back sees only the bare room. So even if you've got the orchid and the feather the first time you walk in and you see everything, you see the Naga, you see how the shrine was centuries ago, I don't know how many centuries ago. If you walk out and come back, you're done. So it's one and done, assuming you walk in with the orchid and feather in the first place. So it says, hanging lamps illuminate the room while incense burners fill it with exotic scents and curling smoke. Cushions and reed mats cover the floor. Pots of blooming flowers line the plastered walls, and singing birds flit from plant to plant. An immense snake with iridescent scales rests on a heap of cushions opposite the doorway. It rises slowly to a height of 5 feet, staring directly into your eyes as it moves. Its face is remarkably human-like, and its tongue flicks before it speaks. I am Saja Nabaza. What do you seek in this ancient place? Speak truly, for I hear your hearts. Okay, so now this is a Guardian Naga in bold, so that's the stat block for this, is Guardian Naga. Hopefully the players will not be stupid enough to attack the Guardian. Now, the Naga, this did not come up in my adventure, because at this point Artis Cimber was not with. The players do meet Artis and Dragonbait later in the adventure. And every now and then in this adventure, it'll say, if you want to have your players encounter Artis Cimber, here's a good place for it. And this is one of them. It says, if you haven't yet encountered Artis Cimber and Dragonbait, they might be conferring with the Guardian Naga when the party arrives. She knows what happens to the city of Mesro and tells Artis that it won't return as long as Rosnissi lives. This gives Artis incentive to accompany the party to Omu. Now, Mezzo and all of that has not come up in my adventure, even though Artis and Dragonbait are with them. But, just be aware that this encounter intersects with Artis and Dragonbait and his desire around the city of Mesro. The Naga knows through visions that Rosnissi and his Yanti followers, Yantu? I always want to say Yanti. Followers are scheming to end the world from their lair in Omu. She doesn't know much about the death curse, but when the players describe it, she confirms that it fits with various omens tied to Omu. The Naga knows that Omu lies between the peaks of Flame and the Valley of Lost Honor. And she also knows it's sunken below the level of the surrounding jungle. So the best way to spot it will be from the air or the nearest high ground. And that'll come into play later when the players are at the Monastery of Curse of All and hanging out with the Aarakocra, the bird people. The Naga remembers Rosnissi's first uprising, and she urges the characters to kill him, both as punishment for his past atrocities and to prevent any possibility of a recurrence. Each character who agrees receives a supernatural charm. See Chapter 7 of the Dungeon Master's Guide to aid their task. Assign charms to the party that are appropriate to the roles in the party, or the characters that are appropriate to the roles in the party. And this goes on. I didn't go here, and some players and DMs might have a problem with what it's about to say, but it says characters who seem reluctant might have a Geas, G-E-A-S, cast on them, and that's basically like a compulsion to do something. Like, this is so important. Bam! You now have it's been laid on you that you are going to defeat Rosnissi. And that, I'm okay with that. I think my players would be okay with that. But there's DMs and players out there that are very sensitive to player agency. And, and for all I know, I could do it. One of my players would be like, I don't like that. And then we could talk about it. But, just be aware that it's that important to the Guardian Naga. I mean, she'll whammy you. And you'll be like, okay, I'll go do it. So when I diverged from the book here, so the book, after you meet with the Naga, and this encounter really does two things importantly for the story. One, it's big neon Eat It Joe's sign going straight to Omu. Omu's very important. Two, Rosnissi is very dangerous and must be destroyed or should be destroyed. So it's flagging those two things because, they could just wander. We don't know where to go next. We don't know what to do. We do blah, blah, blah. Wait, what do we do? Well, this is one of those encounters that gives them a big arrow to go somewhere. And even though it doesn't say that the Soulmonger, the Death Curse, is definitely in Omu, the Guardian Naga does say that fits with omens that are tied to Omu. And there's some omens in encounters in the, Portent I believe, that say the same thing. So by the book, when you leave the shrine, you can never get back to the Guardian Naga's presence. But also, it's just a barren chamber from that point on. But it's also dawn of the next day, no matter what time it was when they entered. You come out as dawn of the next day. They can descend the ziggurat with no difficulty, with or without orchid and feather. The snakes are gone, the steps are solid, and a clear path extends through the plants and thorns. When they reach the ground, characters see blue tulips blooming all around the base of the ziggurat. The tulips are beautiful but non-magical. I'm not sure what the symbolism of the blue tulips. Maybe there's some deeper historical or mythological thing there, or maybe the author is like, well, that'll be pretty. Now, my players did not do this. What the Naga did, and, this is what I'm saying, it's like Lady Galadriel from when she's like, I need you you're on a dangerous path. Here's some stuff to help. So she gives out the supernatural charms, which, by the way, my players always forget to use those. But I gave them to them, and every now and then I'll remind them about them. And then what I had, but to help speed the adventure along, and I mean, I want the players to go to Curse of All next, because hooking up with the Aarakocra will be good allies, and then it'll eventually, that'll be how they get to Omu. But both the Naga and we get to Curse of All tell them basically, the Naga's like, you're not ready yet. If you go to Omu right now, you will die. So I'm sending you to Curse of All. You must ask for teacher. Whatever the name of the leader at Curse of All is. I think it's teacher. And the Naga is like, you're not ready. You need to do some more before you go to Omu. And boop, teleports them to Curse of All. So they get teleported out. Pow. And Azaka doesn't go with them because her part is done. So Azaka doesn't, that's where they part ways with Azaka. She just sees them teleport out. And then she's out of the story. I mean, the Naga doesn't do anything dangerous to her or anything. Just Azaka's done. Their guide, their were-tiger guide that got them to Orolunga. And then next session, we'll talk about Curse of All and the Aarakocra and all that cool stuff. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. Thanks again, new Patreon supporter Justin. And we will catch all of you next time on Shame Plays.